Those are very powerful number. Manny, you've been organizing a lot of different conferences and dealing a lot with some of the big corporate players. What are you hearing? What's the vibe now when this whole new census stuff comes out? Who's waking up and what are you seeing out there?
Well, I think that the traditional players, your consumer goods, your packaged good companies, those players have been in the game for a long time. The people that I'd like to shake are the technology company, which frankly still lag far behind compared to the opportunities and the fact that Latinos are very gadget-oriented. They love technology. They're embracing it. They see it as part of their future and part of their empowerment that they need for success for themselves and for their children. So I'd like to really shake the technology company. I would also like to say what's going on to the healthcare industry. It really lags far, far behind in investing in reaching Hispanic consumers, many of which are not insured or actually could sure use a lot better understanding of certain use of drugs that are out there, a lot of medicine. There's a big opportunity, and this has been around for years. So I hope that the census can actually shake those players out. But there's a couple of things that I always talk to clients about. For years, we've always used the analogy that there's more Latinos in the United States than Canadians in Canada. That's a great word picture that I've always used. I love the new ones that Cesar mentioned. I think they're terrific as well. I think one of the biggest things that I emphasize is, hey, you're always talking about new emerging, when I'm talking to the Fortune 500, you're talking about emerging markets, you're talking about China and India. Well, we have a massive sleeping emerging giant in your own backyard, and you don't have to travel and you don't have to have all the uncertainty about how to navigate through those laws over there. So why don't you tap into that one? So those are some of the thoughts that I get when you ask that question.
That's a great one. We have an interview, I think, that we did with you, with Charlie Garcia, where we talk about the United States Hispanic market as the 10th largest economy in the world. Exactly. So if you're going to the BRIC countries, we're right here. We added the H, right?
Absolutely.
Raul, I wanted to ask you, because obviously this is the information that you produce is information that goes out to everybody, that's available to everybody. Have you gotten any reaction, or do you guys are getting calls? Are there meetings that your colleagues are doing with corporate America to understand how is this information getting out into corporations, and how do you interface with that community, with the corporate community?
Well, we have as I mentioned, we had more than 250,000 partners in the 2010 census, and we want to continue those collaborations because we need to get ready for the 2020 census. So it's important for us to collaborate with every part of society, private sector and public sector. But I would add that the census provided us this basic information, but we have another set of data that we generate every year called the American Community Survey, and that gives us characteristics about the population. From there, we can get median household income, educational attainment, occupations in the population, whether they have health insurance or not. So that is information that we can provide and available for everyone's use to find out what's happening with the particular population, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. So that's a companion to the census. It's a vital resource, and we do this yearly. We send this survey to 3 million households, and soon we'll be reporting data from 2010 on the American Community Survey, so we'll be able to make a good comparison with the census and that. So that is what we do. That is the value that we provide. We measure the population in this way, and also measure the economy. We do that through our various surveys, our economic census. So that is the value that we could provide the corporate America, so they can see what's happening and they make market decisions.
That's great. The census actually reported recently that the number of Hispanic-owned businesses in the United States increased by 43.7% to 2.3 million. That's more than twice the national average of 18% between 2002 and 2007, with payrolls of almost $55 billion. What factors, in your opinion, Eduardo and Cesar, have contributed to this impressive growth? Eduardo?
Well, it seems to me that we have to look at, if you look at the Hispanic population in the United States and where it's growing, some of the data is not yet out, but it will be out. And part of what we see, and we have seen historically, clearly what's the largest growth number? It's Mexicans. And it has to do with a common border. It has to do with socioeconomic conditions in Mexico that have, in fact, triggered this massive growth of the Mexican population in the U.S. But we also have numbers that I'm sure Raul can tell us when they will be released. I'm just biting at the bit here to see what it's going to tell us, for example, about other groups. For example, I'm certain that just in South Florida, if you look at the numbers of Colombians, of Venezuelans, and others, and the kinds of consumer patterns that you'll be interested in looking at, we know just from the figures that have already been released, for example, that Colombians are in fact the highest educated. We also know that there's about 1.6 million Salvadorans, for example, and we know what they're doing in some measure as far as remittances are concerned. So, the factors that drive growth in the United States are very much rooted in what's going on in Latin America as well.
That's right.
And as long as Latin America, right now, in fact, what you see in the region, it's probably the only region in the world that has survived the financial crisis in some way better than the United States. But yet what we haven't really determined, and I think some of the ACS figures will tell us, the Pew Foundation, the Pew Hispanic Center has been documenting, for example, reverse migration. But much of this is speculating right now, people returning home. I think you're absolutely correct. The trend is going to be in the next decade, in the next census of 2020, we're probably going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 million Hispanics in the United States. And that's going to be a powerful economic bloc. It's going to be an enormously powerful political bloc. So 2012 is important, but not as important as down the road.
Cesar, when you hear these numbers and you're talking about a $54 billion payroll because of the economic impact of Hispanic-owned businesses, what other factors you find that are contributing to this kind of power, economic power in the country?
Well, Hispanics, well, this nation was built on the energy and the passion of immigrants, right? Sure. Latinos, most Latinos are immigrants, not all of us. Some of us were here and the borders moved around us. Nonetheless, that passion, that energy of being an immigrant, the pressure from having left home, oftentimes a place with lots of turmoil, both economic and political, and sometimes related to security, provides the pressure to not only to survive, but to succeed. So there's pressure to survive, whether you're crossing over through the desert with a limited amount of water, or whether you simply want to feed your family. That same pressure results in entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurs would be better served by being better prepared educationally, and I think we do need to be concerned about that. Nonetheless, many entrepreneurs have very little formal education, but a lot of initiative and passion, and create successful businesses, and we see them all around us. So, but from a strategic national perspective, the United States should really pay attention to this. And the reason is that the United States and all of its taxpayers will become increasingly dependent on the tax revenue of Latinos. And Latino businesses are at the forefront. They're driving the creation of new jobs, new businesses, and new tax revenue. That's critical. And until our political leaders realize how critical that is, and our corporate leaders realize that, and we will not have the infrastructure from an educational perspective to develop these entrepreneurs into the next generation of American corporations that will help this country become even greater in the future.
Well, that's why the theme of this webcast was the political, social, and economic influence, because as we can see from what we've talked about today, it's so intertwined. I wanted to ask Raul if you can give us a little sneak preview of what date is next. Dr. Gamarra already expressed his anxiety. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that are anxious. What's coming next and when?
Well, tomorrow afternoon, we will release a brief. We're doing a series of briefs, 16 briefs on the 2010 census, and tomorrow afternoon, we're going to release a brief on the Hispanic population. So we're able to provide national figures on how many Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and other groups of Hispanics. So we'll be releasing that information tomorrow. I think it'll be very interesting. In addition, we'll be releasing information on the sex and age composition of the United States. And then more detailed information will start to be released in June and July and August. Detailed breakouts for the population, age and sex, et cetera, down to the block level. So more information to come. But tomorrow will be an interesting day because of our Hispanic brief will be released.
We'll make sure to have that information on our blog. We're gonna take a few minutes now to take some questions from some of the folks that are following us on the webcast. And the first question is, why aren't Latinos on Obama's agenda? What would happen with free trade agreements with Panama and Colombia? This is for Eduardo Gamarra.
Well, in some measure, I think you have to understand where American politics is going. And, I think we've had pressures, really protectionist pressures on both sides of the aisle. It hasn't just been the Democrats, although, in fact, if you look at the 2008 elections, even Mrs. Clinton had somewhat of a protectionist agenda, talking about reviewing NAFTA, talking about reviewing all kinds of different free trade agreements. Over the course of the last 6 months, the Obama administration has, in fact, I think, jump-started the process of particularly the free trade agreement with Panama and with Colombia. Now, having said that, one thing is for the president to say, because several presidents have been pushing this, and the fact that Obama is now chasing this is important, but it doesn't mean it's going to pass. And it's very difficult to pass ambitious free trade agreements in an electoral year, and especially in a context as difficult as we face today, where you have, on the one hand, a very significant Tea Party movement that has moved the Republican Party to the right, which should indicate that moving to the right means that you're moving toward a more open economy. But we have a protectionist right. And by the same token, we have a protectionist left. And so stuck in the middle is really a very reduced coalition. I'm still hopeful that we're going to be able to see some kind of lifting of those obstacles, particularly in the House, and hopefully by the end of 2012 there'll be a new legislature, because after all the entire House will be up for elections, and a third of the Senate. So I'm still hoping that will be changed. But it never really depends just on the will of the executive branch.
You told me something earlier today. We were talking about the number of states that require when you're registering to vote to check off your race, and that was an interesting topic because it relates to how we can really track and find out how many Latinos are registered to vote, and therefore how we can communicate with them.
Yeah, there are actually very few states, and in fact, Raul will be able to clarify this for us as well. Because if you look at the 10 questions that were asked in the short form, the census form, while it's very useful for the kind of data that's being released, it's not very useful from the perspective of a political scientist trying to understand how Latinos are participating in politics, because that question isn't asked there. More importantly, there are very few states. In fact, for example, in California, you, in fact, are ordered to leave number 8 blank. And then number 8 is, what is your ethnic background? So if you go to California and try to find out how many registered voters are Hispanic, you don't have that data. Florida and Georgia do have that data. North Carolina does have that data as well. But overall, New York, for example, does not, neither does Illinois, and those are big states with big. So in fact, much of what we're doing is a guessing game, trying to predict how Latinos, what percentage of Latinos are voting, how many Latinos are registered, and so on. It's become a very difficult thing, and I think it would be very useful as part of the ACS survey to see something. I know it's complicated because you have all kinds of issues related to civil rights. You have all kinds of issues related. I mean, after all, it is, forgive me for being a little bit academic, but it's a corporatist question. In this country, we identify ourselves either as Republicans or Democrats. A corporatist question is to identify you by what you are, right? Whether you're a female, a male, or whether you're a Hispanic or by race. And so many states have opted simply to leave that question out. It doesn't help us from the research perspective, and I would hope that kind of data comes out a little bit more forcefully, because I think it's going to help corporations make important decisions and obviously candidates.